The flash of gunfire across the moonlit creek shattered the midnight stillness as Madeline Zimmerman plunged into the icy waters, her lungs burning with each desperate stroke. Behind her, angry shouts echoed through the canyon walls, the men who had kept her captive for nearly 2 weeks closing in with every passing second. Her hands, raw and bleeding from the ropes she'd managed to escape, clawed at the rushing current as she fought to put distance between herself and the nightmare she'd endured since the stagecoach robbery. It was May of 1875, and what had begun as a journey to start anew in Salida, Colorado had turned into a desperate fight for survival. Madeline had lost track of the days spent in that squalid cabin, listening to her captors argue about ransoms and payoffs while she plotted her escape. Now freedom was tantalizingly close, if only she could reach the opposite shore. The water was deeper than she'd anticipated, the spring melt from the mountains turning the normally placid creek into a roaring torrent. Her sodden dress weighed her down like an anchor, the heavy fabric threatening to drag her beneath the surface with each passing second. Madeline had grown up in Philadelphia, her swimming experience limited to gentle summer dips in shallow ponds. Nothing had prepared her for the raw power of a Colorado waterway in springtime. "There she is," a voice shouted from the bank behind her. "Shoot her if you have to. We can't let her reach town." A bullet sliced through the water inches from her head. Madeline gasped, inhaling water as she tried to dive beneath the surface. The current caught her then, spinning her body as if she weighed nothing at all. Disoriented and choking, she flailed against the pull of the water, her strength rapidly fading as the creek carried her downstream. "I'm going to die here," she thought as her head slipped beneath the surface again, her lungs screaming for air she couldn't reach. Her body hit something hard, a submerged log or rock, sending pain shooting through her side. The world began to dim at the edges, the roar of the water growing distant as consciousness started to slip away. Then suddenly, unexpectedly, strong arms encircled her waist. A powerful force pulled her upward, breaking through the surface. Madeline coughed and sputtered as air filled her lungs once more. Through water-blurred vision, she caught a glimpse of her rescuer broad shoulders, a determined jaw, eyes focused intently on the far shore as he cut through the current with powerful strokes, pulling her alongside him. "Hold on, miss." His voice was deep, steady despite the exertion. Almost there. Isaac Abernathy had been making his evening rounds when he heard the gunshots echo across the valley. 10 years working cattle in the Colorado Territory had taught him that nothing good ever came from midnight gunfire. He'd left his mount tethered to a cottonwood and made his way cautiously toward the creek, Winchester rifle in hand, expecting to stumble upon rustlers or maybe a dispute between miners turned deadly. Instead, he'd spotted the woman struggling in the water, her pale face appearing and disappearing beneath the surface as armed men shouted from the opposite bank. Isaac hadn't hesitated. He dropped his gun, shed his heavy coat, and plunged into the frigid waters, reaching the drowning woman just as she began to sink. Now, with powerful strokes born from summers spent swimming in these same waters as a boy, he pulled them both toward the shadowy bank, away from the men still shouting on the far side. The current fought him, but Isaac was familiar with its tricks and traps. He angled their approach, working with the flow rather than against it, until finally his boots scraped against the rocky creek bed. Standing in waist-deep water, he lifted the half-conscious woman into his arms and carried her the remaining distance to shore. Behind them, across the water, their pursuers had fallen silent, apparently unwilling to attempt the crossing themselves. "Miss, can you hear me?" Isaac gently laid her on the grassy bank, pushing wet strands of hair from her face. In the moonlight, he could see bruises on her wrists and a cut along her cheekbone. "Miss?" Madeline coughed violently, water spilling from her lips as she rolled to her side. For several moments, she could only gasp and tremble, her body fighting to recover from the near drowning. Finally, she looked up at her rescuer, taking in the concerned face framed by dripping dark hair. They'll come around," she managed between chattering teeth. "The bridge, quarter-mile upstream." Isaac nodded, already gathering his discarded coat. He wrapped it around her shivering form before retrieving his rifle. "My horse is nearby. Can you stand?" Madeline tried to push herself up, but her limbs felt like lead, unresponsive to her commands. Isaac didn't wait for her to struggle further. He scooped her into his arms once more, cradling her against his chest as he moved swiftly through the trees. "I'm Isaac Abernathy," he said, his voice low as they moved deeper into the shadows. "Foreman at the Double Circle Ranch just outside of Salida. Madeline." "Zimmerman," she whispered, her head resting against his shoulder, too exhausted to hold it up any longer. "Thank you for saving my life." "Those men back there," Isaac continued, pausing to listen for sounds of pursuit. "They after you for a reason." Madeline closed her eyes briefly. "Stagecoach robbery. 2 weeks ago, they took me, wanted ransom. My uncle in Salida, they thought he had money." Isaac's expression hardened as he reached his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding waiting patiently where he'd left it. "Well, they won't touch you again, Miss Zimmerman, that's a promise." With practiced ease, he lifted her onto the saddle before swinging up behind her. One arm secured around her waist, he turned the horse toward the west, away from town. "We can't risk the main road tonight. I've got a line cabin about an hour's ride from here. We'll hole up there until morning, then get you to the sheriff." Madeline wanted to object, to insist they ride straight for town and the safety of her uncle's home, but exhaustion was quickly overwhelming her. The steady rhythm of the horse beneath them and the solid warmth of the man behind her lulled her toward unconsciousness. "Stay with me, Miss Zimmerman," Isaac's voice rumbled in her ear. "Just a little while longer." She fought to keep her eyes open as they rode through the night, the dark landscape of pine and aspen slipping past like shadows. Isaac kept them moving at a steady pace, occasionally stopping to listen for pursuers, but the only sounds were the natural chorus of the wilderness wind through the trees, the distant call of a night bird, the soft fall of their horses' hooves on the needle-strewn path. The line cabin appeared suddenly, a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky. It was small but sturdy, built into the side of a gentle slope with a corral for horses attached to one side. Isaac helped Madeline down, supporting most of her weight as her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. "Let's get you inside and warmed up," he said, leading her to the cabin door. "Then you can rest properly." The interior was simple but clean, a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed pushed against one wall, a rough-hewn table and chair, and basic supplies stored on shelves. Isaac settled Madeline in the chair before quickly building a fire, his movements efficient and practiced. Within minutes, warmth began to fill the small space. "Your clothes are soaked through," he observed, turning back to her. "I have some spare things you could wear while yours dry." "They'll be too big, but they're clean and dry." Madeline nodded gratefully, too exhausted to feel embarrassment. "Thank you." Isaac retrieved a flannel shirt and wool trousers from a trunk, placing them on the bed before turning his back. "I'll step outside to check on the horse. Take your time." Once alone, Madeline struggled out of her sodden dress, the fabric clinging stubbornly to her skin. Her fingers, still numb from the cold water, fumbled with buttons and ties until finally she stood shivering in her wet undergarments. These two she removed before quickly pulling on the offered clothing. The shirt hung to her knees, the sleeves extending well past her fingertips, and she had to roll the trousers at both waist and ankle to keep them from falling off altogether. A soft knock at the door preceded Isaac's return. He carried a steaming cup which he offered to her as she settled back in the chair. Coffee, strong and sweet, good for shock, he explained, then frowned as he noticed the bruises more clearly in the firelight. They hurt you. It wasn't a question, but Madeline answered anyway. Not as badly as they might have. They were, waiting for payment. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug, breathing in the rich aroma. My uncle isn't wealthy. I don't know why they thought he was. Isaac pulled the lone chair closer to the fire for her before settling himself on the edge of the bed. How did you escape? They got careless. Left me with only one guard while the others went hunting. She took a sip of the coffee, letting the warmth spread through her chest before continuing. He fell asleep. I managed to work my hands free from the ropes, then hit him with a cooking pot when he woke up. I ran until I reached the creek. It seemed safer than trying to follow the road. Isaac nodded, his expression a mixture of concern and admiration. Quick thinking. Most folks would have panicked. Oh, I panicked, Madeline admitted, a ghost of a smile touching her lips for the first time. Just did it while running. That earned her a chuckle from Isaac, the sound unexpectedly warm in the rustic cabin. Well, you're safe now. Get some rest. I'll keep watch, and come morning we'll head into Salida. Sheriff Miller's a good man. He'll organize a posse to track down those men. Madeline hesitated, her gaze moving to the single bed. Isaac caught her concern immediately. You take the bed, Miss Zimmerman. I'll be fine right here by the fire. But I've slept in worse places, he assured her. Been a cowhand since I was 15. You learn to make do. Madeline wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was rapidly claiming the last of her strength. She finished the coffee and made her way to the bed, sinking onto the simple mattress with a sigh of relief. Isaac added another log to the fire before settling himself on a bedroll near the hearth, his rifle within easy reach. Mr. Abernathy, Madeline murmured, her eyes already closing. Yes, Miss Zimmerman, thank you, not just for pulling me from the creek, but for being kind. It's been a difficult time. In the firelight, Isaac's expression softened. Get some sleep, Miss Zimmerman, you're safe now. As Madeline drifted into much-needed sleep, her last conscious thought was that for the first time in 2 weeks, she actually believed those words. The morning light filtered through the cabin's single window, casting golden patterns across the rough wooden floor. Madeline woke slowly, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous night came rushing back as she sat up, wincing at the soreness in her muscles. Isaac was already awake, tending to something at the small cook stove. The scent of coffee and frying bacon filled the cabin. He turned when he heard her stir. Morning, he greeted, his voice surprisingly gentle for such a rugged-looking man. How are you feeling? Madeline took stock of her condition. Sore, but alive thanks to you. Hungry? Isaac asked, gesturing to the pan on the stove. It's not fancy, but it'll keep you going until we reach town. Starving, actually, she admitted. They didn't feed me much. A flash of anger crossed Isaac's face, but he quickly masked it. Well, we'll fix that right quick. He served up a simple but hearty breakfast of bacon, beans, and pan bread. Madeline ate with surprising enthusiasm, only realizing how famished she'd been when the food was before her. Isaac watched with quiet satisfaction, refilling her coffee cup when it emptied. Your clothes are still damp, he observed, nodding to where he'd hung her dress near the fire overnight. But I've got a spare coat you can wear for the ride into town. It's about 3 hours from here if we take it steady. I don't want to inconvenience you further, Madeline said, suddenly conscious of all this stranger had already done for her. Isaac shook his head. No inconvenience, Miss Zimmerman. I need to head into town anyway. We're moving cattle to summer pasture next week, and I've got supplies to pick up. After breakfast, they prepared to leave. Madeline's dress was still too damp to wear comfortably for a long ride, so Isaac suggested she keep his clothes for the journey. He wrapped her in a heavy canvas duster that nearly swallowed her whole but would keep her warm during the morning ride. Outside, the spring morning was crisp and clear, the surrounding mountains rising majestically against a brilliant blue sky. Madeline paused for a moment, taking in the breathtaking vista that had been hidden by darkness the night before. "It's beautiful," she murmured, almost to herself. Isaac, leading his horse from the small corral, glanced at her with a hint of pride. "Most beautiful country in the world, if you ask me. Been all over Texas, Kansas, even California once. Nothing compares to Colorado. I was beginning to think I'd made a terrible mistake coming west," Madeline admitted as he helped her onto the horse. "Now I'm not so sure." Isaac mounted behind her, his presence solid and reassuring at her back. "Plenty of good people in these parts, Miss Zimmerman. Don't let a few outlaws color your judgment." They set off at an easy pace, following a narrow trail that wound through stands of aspen and pine. As they rode, Isaac pointed out landmarks and shared bits of local knowledge. Which mountain peaks had names, where the best fishing spots were, how to tell if a storm was brewing by watching the wildlife. Gradually, Madeline found herself relaxing, the horrors of her captivity temporarily receding as she absorbed the magnificent landscape around them. She began to ask questions about ranch life, about how Isaac had come to be in Colorado, about Salida and its surroundings. "Came out here when I was just 18, Isaac explained as they crossed a high meadow dotted with early spring wildflowers. "My pa was a blacksmith back in Missouri, wanted me to take over the forge. But I'd read those dime novels about the frontier, had my head filled with notions of adventure." "And did you find it? Adventure?" Madeline asked, genuinely curious. Isaac chuckled. "Found hard work, mostly. Cowboying isn't like in those stories. It's long hours, bad weather, ornery cattle, and bunkhouse beans. But yes, there's been adventure too, and freedom. That's what I really came looking for. Freedom," Madeline repeated softly. "That's why I came west too. After my parents died last year, there wasn't much keeping me in Philadelphia. My uncle's letters about Colorado sounded so promising: open spaces, new opportunities, a place where the past doesn't matter quite so much." Isaac was quiet for a moment. "Your uncle, he expecting you? He must be worried sick if you were due 2 weeks ago." Madeline nodded. "Uncle Frederick. He's my mother's brother. He came west for his health 5 years ago, lung trouble. The mountain air helped him recover. He owns a small mercantile in Salida now." "Zimmerman's goods?" Isaac asked, surprise evident in his voice. "Frederick Zimmerman is your uncle?" "Yes, do you know him?" "Everyone knows Mr. Zimmerman," Isaac replied. "Good man. Fair in his dealings, extends credit to ranchers when times are tough. The double circle does most of its business with him." The knowledge that her uncle was well regarded brought Madeline a measure of comfort. When her parents had died of influenza within weeks of each other, leaving her alone at 22, Frederick's invitation to come live with him had been a lifeline. Now, after the ordeal she'd endured, the prospect of reaching his home felt like salvation. As the morning progressed, the trail began to descend toward the valley where Salida nestled along the Arkansas River. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horse and share the simple lunch. Isaac had packed jerky, dried apples, and the last of the morning's pan bread. Seated on a fallen log with the valley spread before them, Madeline found herself studying her rescuer. In the full light of day, she could see him clearly for the first time. Isaac Abernathy was perhaps 30, with dark hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar and eyes the deep blue of mountain lakes. His face was tanned and weathered from years outdoors, with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes despite his serious demeanor. He wasn't handsome in the refined way of Philadelphia gentlemen, but there was something compelling in his quiet strength and unpretentious manner. "You're staring, Miss Zimmerman," Isaac observed without looking up from adjusting his saddle. Madeline flushed. "I'm sorry. I was just thinking how strange life can be. Yesterday I was certain I would die in that cabin or trying to escape it. Now I'm here alive, because a stranger happened to be in exactly the right place at the right time." Isaac turned to face her then, his expression thoughtful. "My pa used to say there's no such thing as coincidence, only providence that we're too blind to recognize." "You believe that?" he shrugged, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'm not much for philosophizing, Miss Zimmerman. But I do believe I was meant to be by that creek last night." The simple statement, delivered without dramatics, affected Madeline more profoundly than any flowery declaration might have. She found herself blinking back unexpected tears. "Well," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "I'm certainly grateful for Providence then." They continued their journey, the trail gradually widening as they approached more settled areas. Occasional homesteads appeared, smoke rising from chimneys, children pausing in their chores to wave at the passing riders. By mid-afternoon, the buildings of Salida came into view, nestled in the valley with mountains rising dramatically on all sides. "Not much to look at compared to Philadelphia, I imagine," Isaac commented as they approached the town. Madeline took in the orderly grid of streets, the mix of wood and brick buildings, the church spire rising against the mountain backdrop. "It's perfect," she said simply. The main street was busy with the normal activities of a spring afternoon, wagons delivering goods, shoppers moving between stores, cowboys lounging outside the saloon. Their arrival didn't go unnoticed. A woman riding double with a cowboy, dressed in men's clothing several sizes too large, was bound to draw attention. Isaac guided the horse directly to the sheriff's office, a square brick building with a sign proclaiming T. Miller, Sheriff, hanging above the door. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Madeline down. Her legs, stiff from the long ride and still weak from her ordeal, nearly buckled as she touched the ground. Isaac's hand at her elbow steadied her. "Take a moment," he said quietly. "No rush now." When she nodded her readiness, he escorted her inside, his hand remaining supportively at her back. Sheriff Thomas Miller was a barrel-chested man with a gray-streaked beard and shrewd eyes that missed little. He looked up from his desk as they entered, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to sharp interest as he took in Madeline's appearance and Isaac's protective stance. "Abernathy," he greeted with a nod. "Trouble. This is Miss Madeline Zimmerman," Isaac explained. "Frederick Zimmerman's niece. She was taken during a stagecoach robbery 2 weeks back, managed to escape last night." The sheriff was on his feet immediately. "Miss Zimmerman, we've had search parties out looking for that stagecoach and its passengers since it went missing. Your uncle's been beside himself with worry." "The other passengers?" Madeline asked urgently, the question that had haunted her for 2 weeks finally finding voice. "There was an elderly couple, the Hendersons, and a young man, a minor, I think." Miller's expression grew somber. "The driver and shotgun messenger were found dead at the scene. The Hendersons were released after 3 days apparently. They didn't have enough money to be worth keeping. Young fella named Pearson was let go when his mining company paid a small ransom." "But they kept you," Isaac said quietly to Madeline. She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warmth of the office. They said my uncle was wealthy, that he'd pay handsomely. I told them he wasn't rich, just a shopkeeper, but they wouldn't listen. Who were they? Miller asked, pulling out a chair for her. How many? I need descriptions. For the next hour, Madeline detailed everything she could remember about her captivity, the 4 men who had taken her, their appearances, names they had used, the location of the cabin as best she could recall, and finally, her escape and rescue. Throughout her account, Isaac remained beside her, occasionally offering clarification about landmarks or distances. Miller took extensive notes, his expression growing increasingly grim. When she finished, he set down his pencil with a determined gesture. I know these men, he stated flatly. The Blackwater Gang. They've been operating in this territory for about a year now. Stagecoach robberies, extortion, cattle rustling. This is the first time they've held someone this long. Will you be able to find them? Madeline asked. Count on it, Miller assured her. I've been building a case against them for months. Your testimony might be what finally puts them behind bars. He stood, reaching for his hat. But first things first, we need to get you to your uncle. He's had a watch posted at his store day and night, hoping for news. Isaac cleared his throat. If it's all the same to you, Sheriff, I'd like to accompany Miss Zimmerman. Make sure she gets there safely. Miller studied him for a moment, then nodded. Good idea. I'm going to round up some deputies, get a posse together. Those men can't have gone far, not with the creek running high from the melt. They exited the sheriff's office, stepping back onto the busy street. Madeline felt oddly vulnerable in the open after so many days of confinement, followed by the isolated tranquility of the line cabin. The noise and movement of the town seemed overwhelming after her ordeal. Isaac noticed her discomfort immediately. It's just a short walk to your uncle's store, he said reassuringly. Right at the end of the street there. They had covered perhaps half the distance when a shout rang out from the doorway of a large building with a painted sign reading Zimmerman's Goods and General Mercantile. Madeline. My God, Madeline. A tall, thin man with a neatly trimmed silver beard came running toward them, heedless of the mud puddles or the curious stares of passers-by. Frederick Zimmerman's face was a study in disbelief and joy as he reached them, enfolding Madeline in a fierce embrace. You're alive, he kept repeating, his voice choked with emotion. You're alive. We feared the worst when the Hendersons returned without you. Madeline clung to him, the familiar scent of tobacco and peppermint that had always characterized her uncle bringing a fresh wave of tears to her eyes. I'm sorry to have worried you, she managed. Frederick held her at arm's length, taking in her unusual attire and the fading bruise on her cheek. His joy quickly shifted to concern. What happened? Are you hurt? She's had a difficult time, Mr. Zimmerman, Isaac interjected gently. Perhaps we could continue this conversation somewhere private. Frederick seemed to notice Isaac for the first time. Of course, and you are. Isaac Abernathy, sir. I work at the Double Circle. Recognition dawned in Frederick's eyes. Abernathy, the foreman, yes. Parker speaks highly of you. He looked between Isaac and Madeline. Were you the one who found her? He saved my life, Madeline said simply. I was drowning and he pulled me from the creek. Frederick's hand came to rest on Isaac's shoulder, his expression solemn. Then I am forever in your debt, young man. Isaac shook his head. No debt, sir. Anyone would have done the same. But it wasn't anyone. It was you. Frederick's grip tightened briefly before he released Isaac's shoulder. Please, both of you, come inside. Martha. He called to a matronly woman who had appeared in the doorway of the store. Prepare some tea and something to eat, and find some proper clothes for my niece. The next few hours passed in a blur for Madeline. She was whisked upstairs to the living quarters above the store, where Martha, the housekeeper, helped her bathe and change into a simple but clean dress. A doctor was summoned to examine her injuries, pronouncing her remarkably well considering her ordeal, prescribing rest and good food to restore her strength. Throughout it all, she was acutely aware that Isaac remained downstairs, waiting patiently as she was tended to. When she finally emerged into the small parlor behind the store, freshly dressed with her hair neatly braided, she found him deep in conversation with her uncle. Both men rose as she entered. Isaac's eyes widened slightly at her transformation, and Madeline felt a curious flutter in her chest at the quiet admiration in his gaze. "There she is," Frederick said warmly, looking more like herself again. "Miss Zimmerman," Isaac greeted her with a slight bow. "You're looking well." "Thanks to you and your hospitality," she replied. "I've just realized I still have your clothes. I'll have them laundered and returned to you." Isaac waved away the concern. "No rush, I have others." Frederick gestured for them both to sit. "Mr. Abernathy has been filling me in on the events of last night and this morning. It seems I have even more reason to be grateful than I initially realized." Martha appeared with a tray of tea and fresh baked scones, which she set on the small table before withdrawing discreetly. Madeline's stomach rumbled at the sight of the food, reminding her that despite the generous breakfast at the cabin, she was still making up for weeks of near starvation. As they ate, Sheriff Miller arrived with news. He had organized a posse of 8 men to track the Blackwater gang, using the information Madeline had provided about the cabin's location. They would depart within the hour. "I'd like to join them," Isaac said, setting down his cup. "I know that area well, and I can show them exactly where Miss Zimmerman entered the creek." Miller nodded approvingly. "Could use a man with your tracking skills, Abernathy." Madeline felt a sudden pang of alarm at the thought of Isaac riding out to confront the very men who had held her captive. Men who had proven themselves violent and unpredictable. "Is that necessary?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Surely the sheriff and his deputies." Isaac turned to her, his expression gentle but resolute. "Those men need to be brought to justice, Miss Zimmerman. Not just for what they did to you, but to ensure they don't harm anyone else." "Mr. Abernathy is right," Frederick agreed, though he patted Madeline's hand sympathetically. "The territory won't be safe until they are behind bars." Madeline knew they were right, of course. But the prospect of Isaac putting himself in danger on her behalf filled her with unexpected dread. She had known this man barely 24 hours, yet the thought of anything happening to him was suddenly unbearable. "When would you return?" she asked, striving to keep her voice neutral. "Hard to say," Miller answered. "Depends on how far they've run. Few days, maybe a week." Isaac was watching her, something unreadable in his blue eyes. "Your uncle will keep you safe," he said quietly. "And I gave you my promise last night those men won't touch you again." There was nothing more to say after that. The men rose to leave, Miller heading out first while Frederick accompanied Isaac to the door. Madeline followed, suddenly desperate for a few more moments in Isaac's presence. At the store's entrance, Frederick shook Isaac's hand warmly. "Come back safely, young man. I'll expect a full report." "Yes, sir," Isaac agreed, then turned to Madeline. For a brief moment they simply looked at each other, a wealth of unspoken words hanging in the air between them. "Thank you," Madeline finally said, the simple phrase utterly inadequate for all she felt. "For everything." Isaac's smile was brief but genuine. "Take care of yourself, Miss Zimmerman. Rest and recover." Then he was gone, striding down the street toward the gathering posse, his tall figure soon lost among the crowd of men preparing to ride out. Frederick put a gentle arm around Madeline's shoulders. "Remarkable young man," he observed. "One of the most respected cowboys in the valley, from what I hear. Started as a simple ranch hand and worked his way up to foreman in just a few years. Yes, Madeline agreed softly. He is remarkable. The days that followed were a strange mixture of relief and tension for Madeline. She was safe in her uncle's home, surrounded by comfort and care after weeks of deprivation. Frederick was kindness itself, ensuring she had everything she needed while giving her space to recover from her ordeal. The townspeople of Salida, upon learning of her rescue, were welcoming and supportive, many stopping by the store with small gifts or simply to express their gladness at her safe return. Yet as her body healed, Madeline found herself increasingly restless. She helped in the store when Frederick would allow it, organized her small bedroom in the apartment upstairs, and even began exploring the town on short walks. But her thoughts continually returned to Isaac Abernathy and the posse tracking her former captors. Had they found the men? Was Isaac safe? Each day that passed without news only increased her anxiety. On the 5th day after the posse's departure, Madeline was arranging a display of fabric bolts when the store's bell jangled. She looked up, prepared to greet a customer, only to find herself face to face with Isaac Abernathy. He stood just inside the doorway, hat in hand, looking somewhat trail-worn but blessedly unharmed. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. "You're back," Madeline finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Isaac nodded, a tired smile touching his lips. "Just now. Thought you and your uncle would want to know right away." Frederick emerged from the storeroom at the sound of voices. "Abernathy, welcome back, son." "What news?" "We got them," Isaac said simply. "All four. They're in the jail now, awaiting the circuit judge." The relief that washed over Madeline was so profound that she had to brace herself against the counter. It was over, truly over. The nightmare that had begun on that stagecoach 2 weeks ago had finally come to an end. Were there difficulties? She asked, noting a fresh scratch along Isaac's jawline. "Nothing we couldn't handle," he assured her, though something in his eyes suggested the confrontation had been more dangerous than he was admitting. "They didn't come quietly, but no one on our side was seriously hurt." Frederick was beaming. "This calls for a celebration. Martha is preparing a special dinner this evening, roast beef, I believe. You must join us, Abernathy." Isaac hesitated, glancing at Madeline. "I wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition," she said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Please." We'd like to hear about what happened." Something in her earnest expression seemed to decide him. "Thank you, I'd be honored." Frederick clapped his hands together. "Excellent. 7 o'clock then. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should inform Martha we'll have a guest." He disappeared into the back of the store, leaving Madeline and Isaac alone among the merchandise. A moment of awkward silence fell between them. It struck Madeline how different this encounter was from their previous interactions. Before, the urgency of her rescue and the danger of her pursuers had created a clear purpose that bound them together. Now, standing in the ordinary setting of her uncle's store, they were suddenly just a man and a woman with no crisis to navigate. "You look well," Isaac observed, breaking the silence. "Getting your strength back," Madeline nodded. "Yes, much better, and you, that looks painful." She gestured to the scratch on his face. Isaac's hand went to his jaw as if he'd forgotten about the injury. It's nothing. Branch caught me while we were riding through some dense woods." He paused, studying her. "You're recovering all right, not just physically, I mean." The question, asked with genuine concern rather than mere politeness, touched her. "Some nightmares," she admitted. "But they're already less frequent. Being here, being safe, it helps." Isaac seemed about to say more when the store bell jangled again, announcing the arrival of customers. He stepped back, replacing his hat. "I should let you get back to work. See you this evening." "Yes," Madeline confirmed, surprised by how much she was looking forward to it. 7 o'clock. As Isaac left, tipping his hat to the entering customers, Madeline found herself watching his retreating figure through the window. Only when her uncle returned, a knowing smile on his face, did she realize she was still staring. "He's a fine man," Frederick remarked casually. "Yes," Madeline agreed, returning her attention to the fabric display. "He is." The dinner that evening was unlike anything Madeline had experienced since arriving in Colorado. Martha had outdone herself. The roast beef was perfectly cooked, accompanied by potatoes, spring vegetables, freshly baked bread, and topped off with an apple pie that filled the apartment with its cinnamon fragrance. Isaac arrived promptly at 7, cleaned up from his journey and dressed in what was clearly his best shirt and trousers. He had even trimmed his beard, Madeline noticed, and the scratch on his jaw looked less angry than it had earlier. Throughout the meal, the conversation flowed easily. Isaac described the posse's journey, tactfully editing the more violent aspects for Madeline's benefit, though she suspected there was much he wasn't saying. Frederick shared stories of Salada's early days, when the town was little more than a collection of tents and rough cabins. Madeline found herself laughing more than she had in months, the lingering shadows of her captivity temporarily banished by the warm company. After dinner, Martha shooed them all into the small parlor while she cleared the table. Frederick settled into his favorite armchair with his pipe, while Isaac and Madeline took seats on the modest sofa. "Tell me, Abernathy," Frederick began, once his pipe was drawing properly, "what brought you to Colorado?" "I've heard bits and pieces from Parker when he comes in for supplies, but I'd like to hear your story." Isaac leaned back, relaxing slightly. "Not much to tell, sir. I grew up in Missouri, son of a blacksmith. Always had a restless spirit, I suppose. Headed west when I was 18, worked cattle drives in Kansas, Nebraska, Wyoming. Found my way to Colorado about 10 years back and knew I'd found home." "No family back in Missouri missing you?" Frederick inquired. A shadow passed across Isaac's features. "My mother passed when I was 14. Father remarried a year later. We didn't see eye to eye after that, left with his blessing, or at least his relief." Madeline felt a pang of sympathy, recognizing the careful way he skirted what was clearly a painful subject. "And you've been with the double circle all this time?" she asked, steering the conversation to safer ground. Isaac's expression lightened. "Most of it. Started as a regular hand, worked my way up. Parker, that's the owner, made me foreman 3 years ago." "Quite an achievement for a man your age," Frederick observed. "Parker must think highly of you." "He's a fair man, gives credit where it's due." Isaac glanced at Madeline. "I understand you came west to make a new start as well, Miss Zimmerman." Madeline nodded, aware of her uncle's interested gaze. "After my parents died, there wasn't much keeping me in Philadelphia. I taught at a girls' school there, but the position, it wasn't fulfilling. When Uncle Frederick invited me to join him, it seemed like providence." "Even after what happened on your journey?" Isaac asked quietly. Madeline considered the question seriously. "Yes, even after that. What those men did was terrible, but it doesn't change the fact that this is where I want to be." She smiled faintly. "Besides, my introduction to Colorado wasn't all bad. I did meet some genuinely good people along the way." The look that passed between them didn't go unnoticed by Frederick, who puffed thoughtfully on his pipe for a moment before abruptly changing the subject. "Abernathy, I understand your ranch is moving cattle to summer pasture soon. Must be a busy time for you." Isaac reluctantly broke his gaze away from Madeline. "Yes, sir, we start the drive day after tomorrow. Should take about a week to get them settled in the high country." "And after that," Frederick pressed, "will you be in town again? Isaac hesitated, clearly sensing the underlying question. "I usually come in for supplies once the herd's settled," he answered carefully. "Excellent," Frederick declared. "Then you must join us for dinner again. Perhaps Madeline could show you around Salida properly. I'm sure there are parts of town she hasn't explored yet herself." "Uncle Frederick," Madeline protested, feeling her cheeks warm at his transparent matchmaking. But Isaac was smiling, the corners of his eyes crinkling in a way that made her heart beat a little faster. "I'd like that very much if Miss Zimmerman is willing." "I am," she said softly. "I'd like that too." The rest of the evening passed pleasantly, but all too soon Isaac was rising to take his leave, citing the early start awaiting him the next day. Frederick excused himself with surprising tact, claiming fatigue, leaving Madeline to see their guest to the door. In the small entryway, away from her uncle's watchful eye, they paused. Isaac took his hat from the hook but made no immediate move to put it on. "Thank you for dinner," he said, his voice lower than it had been in the parlor. "Best meal I've had in a long while." "Thank Martha," Madeline replied with a smile. "I'm hopeless in the kitchen, I'm afraid. I'll be sure to do that." He turned the hat in his hands, uncharacteristically hesitant. Miss Zimmerman Madeline the use of her given name sent a small thrill through her. "Yes. I meant what I said. I'd very much like to see you again when I return from the cattle drive, if that would be agreeable to you." Madeline found herself stepping closer, drawn by the earnest look in his blue eyes. "More than agreeable, Isaac." His smile at her use of his first name was worth any impropriety the familiarity might represent. "I'll be counting the days then." "As will I," she admitted. For a brief moment, she thought he might reach for her hand, perhaps even kiss it in the formal Eastern manner. Instead, he simply held her gaze for a heartbeat longer before settling his hat on his head. "Good night, Madeline." "Good night, Isaac. Be safe on your drive." After he left, Madeline remained by the door, listening to his footsteps fade along the wooden sidewalk. Only when they had disappeared entirely did she return to the parlor, where she found her uncle pretending to read a newspaper. "A fine young man," Frederick commented without looking up. "Very fine indeed." Madeline couldn't hide her smile. "Yes, uncle, he certainly is." The week that followed Isaac's departure dragged interminably for Madeline. She threw herself into work at the store, learning the business from Frederick, who seemed delighted by her interest. She met more of Salida's residents, began attending Sunday services at the small church, and even accepted an invitation to a ladies' quilting circle. Yet through it all, her thoughts continually strayed to Isaac. She found herself watching the street through the store windows, knowing full well he was miles away in the high country. At night, she would stand on the small balcony outside her bedroom, gazing toward the distant mountains and wondering if he was looking at the same stars. "You've got it bad, my dear," Frederick observed one evening, catching her in this reverie. "I haven't seen such pining since Martha's niece fell for the telegraph operator last summer." "I'm not pining," Madeline protested weakly. "I'm just thinking," Frederick chuckled. "About a certain tall cowboy with blue eyes, no doubt." His expression softened at her embarrassment. "It's nothing to be ashamed of, Madeline. Isaac Abernathy is a good man, and it's clear he thinks highly of you." "We barely know each other," she pointed out. "It's foolish to feel this way after such a short acquaintance." "Is it?" Frederick settled into a chair beside her on the balcony. "Your Aunt Margaret and I knew each other exactly 3 weeks before I asked her to marry me. We had 52 wonderful years together before she passed." Madeline turned to him in surprise. "I didn't know that." "Some things don't require years to determine, Madeline. When it's right, it's right." He patted her hand affectionately. "Besides, You've experienced more in your short time with Isaac than many couples do in years of conventional courtship. Danger has a way of revealing a person's true character. Madeline couldn't argue with that. She had seen Isaac at his most authentic, courageous, resourceful, kind in circumstances that allowed for no pretense or posturing. Perhaps that was why her feelings for him had developed so quickly and deeply. "I think he means to call on you properly when he returns," Frederick continued. "Parker mentioned at the bank yesterday that the herd's been settled. The hands should be back by the end of the week." Madeline's heart quickened at the news. "Did he say anything about Isaac specifically?" Frederick's eyes twinkled. "Only that his foreman seemed uncommonly eager to get back to town for a man who usually prefers the open range to civilization. The knowledge that Isaac might be as anxious to see her as she was to see him kept Madeline's spirits buoyant through the remaining days of the week. She found herself taking extra care with her appearance each morning, just in case, and volunteering for duties that kept her near the store's front windows. It was during one such task, arranging a display of ladies' hats, that she finally spotted him. Isaac was riding slowly down the main street, looking fresher and more rested than when she'd last seen him. He dismounted outside the sheriff's office, exchanged words with someone inside, then turned toward Zimmerman's mercantile. Madeline hastily adjusted her hair, smoothed her skirts, and tried to appear naturally occupied when the bell above the door announced his arrival. "Good morning, Miss Zimmerman," Isaac greeted her, removing his hat as he entered. "Mr. Abernathy," she returned with a smile she couldn't suppress. "Welcome back." They stood looking at each other for a long moment until Frederick's voice broke the spell. "Abernathy, good to see you, son. Successful drive." Isaac turned to shake Frederick's outstretched hand. "Yes, sir." "Got the herd settled in fine grazing land, no losses. Couldn't ask for better." "Excellent, excellent." Frederick beamed between them. "I was just telling Madeline she should take a break. It's a beautiful day and she's been cooped up in the store all week. Perhaps you'd accompany her on a walk. Show her some of Salada's finer points." Madeline gave her uncle a look that was half gratitude, half exasperation at his transparent maneuvering. "I'd be honored," Isaac said, glancing at Madeline for confirmation. "If Miss Zimmerman is amenable." "Very amenable," she assured him, already reaching for her shawl. "Let me just fetch my bonnet." Within minutes, they were strolling down Salada's main street side by side. Isaac walked on the outside, closest to the road, in the proper gentlemanly fashion, though he didn't offer his arm. Madeline found herself wishing he would, even as she appreciated his respect for propriety. "Your uncle is not very subtle," Isaac observed once they were out of earshot of the store. Madeline laughed. "No, subtlety has never been Uncle Frederick's strong suit." "I hope you don't feel pressured by his enthusiasm." "Not at all," Isaac assured her, his voice warming. "In fact, I'm grateful. Gives me the excuse I've been looking for to spend time with you." The simple admission sent a pleasant flutter through Madeline's chest. "Have you been looking for excuses?" "Every day for the past week," he confirmed, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Makes it hard to concentrate on wayward cattle when your mind keeps wandering back to town." They had reached the end of the main street, where the buildings gave way to a small park alongside the Arkansas River. By unspoken agreement, they turned onto the path that wound through the grassy area, where several benches offered views of the water. "It's beautiful here," Madeline remarked, gazing at the mountain-fed river flowing clear and swift beside them. "So different from Philadelphia. Do you miss it? The East, I mean." She considered the question seriously. "I miss certain things, theaters, libraries, some friends. But not enough to wish myself back there." She glanced at him. "What about you? Do you ever miss Missouri?" Isaac shook his head. Haven't thought of it as home in years. This is where I belong." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, eventually finding a bench beneath a cottonwood tree. Isaac gestured for Madeline to sit, then settled beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "I've been thinking," he began after a moment, "about what happens next." Madeline turned to him, curious. "Next, for us?" He met her eyes steadily. "I'm not a man of wealth or social standing, Madeline. I work hard, live simply, but I find myself drawn to you in a way I've never experienced before." Her heart quickened at his words, so plainly spoken yet filled with meaning. "I feel the same," she admitted softly. Encouraged, Isaac continued. "I'd like to court you properly if you're willing, with your uncle's blessing, of course." "I'm willing," Madeline said, unable to contain her smile. "And I believe Uncle Frederick's blessing is a foregone conclusion, given his matchmaking efforts." Isaac's answering smile was brilliant, transforming his normally serious face. "Then may I call on you tomorrow evening? Perhaps we could attend the social at the church. I hear they're planning music and refreshments. I'd like that very much." As they sat beneath the cottonwood, the river flowing steadily beside them, Madeline felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The path that had led her here had been fraught with danger and fear, but sitting beside Isaac in the dappled sunlight, she couldn't regret a single step of the journey. The weeks that followed established a pattern that quickly became the happiest period of Madeline's life. True to his word, Isaac called on her regularly Sunday afternoons for walks along the river, Tuesday evenings for dinner with Frederick, Friday nights for whatever social events the town offered. Between visits, he sent small tokens, wildflowers gathered during his rides, a book of poetry he'd found at the general store in the next town over, once even a small carved wooden horse that he'd made himself during evening watches with the herd. Frederick observed their blossoming relationship with undisguised approval, often finding reasons to leave them alone in the parlor or suggesting outings that would give them time together. The people of Salida, too, seemed to take their courtship as a matter of course, nodding approvingly when they walked together through town. "Everyone seems to have decided we're practically engaged," Madeline remarked one Sunday as they strolled back from church, aware of the knowing smiles from passers-by. Isaac glanced down at her, an unreadable expression crossing his face. "Does that bother you?" "Not in the way you might think," she answered honestly. "It's just fast. By Philadelphia standards, we'd barely be acknowledged as keeping company at this stage." "Things move differently out here," Isaac said. "Life is more immediate. People don't waste time with prolonged courtships when they know their own minds." "And do you know your mind?" Madeline asked, her heart suddenly pounding. Isaac stopped walking, turning to face her fully. For the first time he reached for her hand, his calloused palm warm against her fingers. "I've known my mind since the night I pulled you from that creek," he said quietly. "I just wasn't sure if you felt the same." Madeline gazed up at him, seeing the sincere emotion in his blue eyes. "I do," she whispered. "I've never been more certain of anything." For a moment she thought he might kiss her right there on the street. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "I should speak with your uncle," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Ask for his blessing. Would that be agreeable to you?" "Yes," Madeline breathed, hardly able to believe this was happening so quickly. "Very agreeable." The smile that broke across Isaac's face was like sunrise in the mountains, brilliant and transformative. "Tonight, then, after dinner." The rest of the day passed in a blur for Madeline. She moved through her afternoon chores in a daze, her mind filled with thoughts of the evening ahead. When Isaac arrived for dinner, promptly at 6 as always, their eyes met with new significance, a shared secret that made her cheeks flush and his expression soften. Frederick, observant as ever, glanced between them throughout the meal, a knowing smile playing at his lips. Whether he suspected what was coming or simply noted their heightened awareness of each other, he said nothing, keeping the conversation light and general. After Martha had cleared the dessert plates and brought coffee, Frederick settled back in his chair with a contented sigh. "Well, young man," he addressed Isaac, "you look like a fellow with something on his mind. Care to share it?" Isaac straightened, setting down his coffee cup with a steadiness that belied the nervous energy Madeline could sense in him. "Yes, sir, I do have something to discuss with you." He glanced at Madeline. "With both of you." Frederick nodded encouragingly. "Go ahead, son." "Mr. Zimmerman, I've come to care deeply for your niece," Isaac began, his voice clear despite the gravity of the moment. "In the short time I've known her, she has shown herself to be everything I could ever hope for in a partner: brave, kind, intelligent, and stronger than she knows." Madeline felt tears welling in her eyes at his words, so simply spoken yet filled with genuine emotion. "I'm not a wealthy man," Isaac continued, "but I work hard, save my money, and have managed to purchase a small parcel of land outside town. I plan to build a home there, start my own small ranch in time. It would be a modest beginning, but I promise you I would do everything in my power to ensure Madeline's happiness and comfort." Frederick's expression was serious now, though his eyes remained warm. "And what exactly are you asking, Abernathy?" Isaac took a deep breath. "I'm asking for your blessing, sir, to marry Madeline if she'll have me." All eyes turned to Madeline, who found herself momentarily speechless with emotion. She had known this was coming, had anticipated it all day, yet hearing the words spoken aloud still took her breath away. "Madeline," her uncle prompted gently, "this is your decision, my dear." She looked at Isaac, this man who had quite literally saved her life and then proceeded to capture her heart with his quiet strength and unwavering integrity. The answer was as clear as the mountain streams. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the tears now spilling onto her cheeks. "Yes, I'll have you, Isaac Abernathy." The joy that transformed Isaac's face in that moment was something Madeline knew she would remember for the rest of her life. He reached across the table for her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture more meaningful than any flowery declaration. Frederick cleared his throat, blinking rapidly. "Well then," he said, his voice suspiciously hoarse, "you have my blessing, both of you, though I must say it's about time you asked, Abernathy. I was beginning to think I'd need to drop even less subtle hints." The laughter that followed broke the emotional tension, and the evening continued with plans and discussions about the future. Isaac would need a few weeks to prepare his property and begin construction on the cabin he had planned. A fall wedding would give them time to build and furnish a proper home. Later, when Frederick tactfully retired to his room, leaving Isaac and Madeline alone in the parlor, they sat close together on the sofa, hands entwined. "I still can't quite believe this is happening," Madeline confessed. "6 weeks ago, I was a captive with little hope of escape. Now I'm engaged to be married to the most wonderful man I've ever known." Isaac's thumb traced gentle patterns across her knuckles. "Life can change in an instant," he agreed. "The moment I saw you in that creek, something changed in me. I didn't understand it then, but I do now." "What changed?" she asked softly. His eyes, so vividly blue in the lamplight, held hers with unwavering intensity. "Everything," he said simply. "My whole world shifted to include you at its center." Unable to resist any longer, Madeline leaned forward slightly, a silent invitation. Isaac understood immediately. With exquisite gentleness, he lowered his lips to hers in their first kiss, soft, reverent, and filled with promise. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Madeline Zimmerman. I think I have from the first moment I held you in my arms. And I love you, Isaac Abernathy, she whispered back. My rescuer, my future. The summer passed in a whirlwind of activity and anticipation. Isaac, true to his word, began construction on a small but sturdy cabin on his land just outside Salida. The location was perfect, close enough to town for convenience, but nestled in a peaceful valley with views of the mountains and a small creek running along one edge of the property. Madeline visited often to see the progress, marveling at how quickly the structure took shape under Isaac's skilled hands and those of the friends who came to help. She hadn't realized how respected he was in the community until she saw the number of men who willingly gave up their free time to assist with the building, fellow cowhands from the Double Circle, local craftsmen. Even Sheriff Miller stopped by to help raise the roof beams one memorable Saturday. You're lucky, you know, Martha told her one evening as they prepared dinner. Not just because he's handsome, which he certainly is, but because he's the kind of man others respect, says something about his character. Madeline couldn't disagree. With each passing day, she discovered new reasons to admire the man she was going to marry: his quiet integrity, his unwavering work ethic, his genuine kindness to those around him. Frederick, meanwhile, had thrown himself enthusiastically into wedding preparations. He insisted on ordering special fabrics for Madeline's wedding dress, commissioning the town's best seamstress for the task. He arranged for the church to be reserved for the first Saturday in October, engaged the local hotel to prepare a reception feast, and even wrote to Madeline's few remaining relatives in the East, inviting them to attend. "Uncle, this is too much," Madeline protested one evening when he presented her with a catalog of household items from Denver, suggesting she select whatever she needed for her new home. "Isaac and I planned for a simple wedding." Frederick waved away her concerns. "Indulge an old man, my dear. I never had children of my own. Letting me do this for you, it means the world to me." Put that way, Madeline couldn't refuse. She selected modest but quality items for the cabin, knowing that Isaac would insist on contributing his share to their household. As summer turned to early fall, the wedding date drew near. The cabin was completed, a cozy two-room structure with large windows to capture the mountain views. Isaac had built much of the furniture himself: a sturdy dining table, chairs, a bed frame that made Madeline blush when she first saw it, thinking of the nights they would share there as husband and wife. 2 weeks before the wedding, a letter arrived from Philadelphia that cast a momentary shadow over their happiness. Madeline's former employer at the girls' school had written, offering her position back with increased salary and responsibilities. "They're desperate," she told Isaac as they walked along the creek that evening. "The woman they hired to replace me left suddenly. They want me to return immediately." Isaac was silent for a long moment, his expression carefully neutral. "Is that something you want to consider?" he finally asked, his voice even. Madeline stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "No," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. My life is here now, with you." The relief that washed over his features made her heart ache for having caused even a moment's doubt. She reached up to touch his cheek, her fingers tracing the now faded scratch that had marked him when he returned from capturing her kidnappers. "I love you, Isaac Abernathy. Philadelphia has nothing I want or need." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm before drawing her into his arms. Their kisses had grown more passionate as their wedding approached, though they were always careful to maintain propriety. This one, however, held a new intensity, as if Isaac was finally releasing the fear he had momentarily harbored. "I would have gone with you," he murmured against her hair when they finally parted. If that was what you truly wanted. The admission stunned her. You would have left Colorado, your home. Home isn't a place, Madeline, he said simply. It's you. She had no words to respond to such a declaration. Instead, she kissed him again, pouring all her love and certainty into the gesture. The day before their wedding brought a surprise that nearly overwhelmed Madeline with emotion. She was in her bedroom, making final adjustments to her wedding dress, when Frederick called her downstairs. Visitors for you, my dear. Curious, she descended to find an elderly couple standing in the parlor, the Hendersons, who had been her fellow passengers on the ill-fated stagecoach. Miss Zimmerman, Mrs. Henderson exclaimed, hurrying forward to embrace her. Oh, my dear girl, we've been so worried about you. Madeline returned the embrace, surprised but genuinely pleased to see the couple. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, what a wonderful surprise. We couldn't miss your wedding, Mr. Henderson explained, clasping her hand warmly. Not after what we all went through together. When your uncle's invitation reached us in Denver, we set out immediately. We would have come sooner, Mrs. Henderson added, but we only learned of your rescue a month ago. Those terrible men kept us blindfolded most of the time, so we couldn't tell the sheriff where they had taken you. Please, sit down, Madeline urged, guiding them to the sofa. I'm so relieved to see you well. I feared the worst when they separated us. Over tea and Martha's freshly baked scones, the Hendersons shared their experience how the outlaws had released them after determining they carried little of value, how they had made their way to the nearest town and reported the robbery, how they had continued on to Denver still hoping that Madeline would be found safe. And to think you're marrying the very man who rescued you. Mrs. Henderson marveled when Madeline recounted her own story. It's like something from a novel. Isaac is extraordinary, Madeline said simply, unable to keep the love from her voice. I can't wait for you to meet him. We already have, Mr. Henderson revealed with a smile. We stopped by his property on our way into town, wanted to size up the man who won our fellow survivor's heart. And, Madeline asked, suddenly nervous about their impression. Mrs. Henderson patted her hand reassuringly. He's everything a young woman could hope for, my dear. Strong, respectful, clearly devoted to you. And the home he's built. Such care in every detail. The endorsement from these kind people who had shared her ordeal meant more to Madeline than they could know. When Isaac arrived for dinner that evening, the warmth between him and the Hendersons only confirmed what she already knew: she was marrying a truly exceptional man. Their wedding day dawned clear and crisp. The aspens surrounding Salida turned to gold against the evergreen backdrop of pines. Madeline woke early, watching the sunrise paint the mountains from her bedroom window, a sense of perfect peace settling over her. Martha and Mrs. Henderson helped her dress in the beautiful gown Frederick had commissioned, ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, simpler than what would have been fashionable in Philadelphia, but perfectly suited to Madeline and the occasion. You look absolutely radiant, Mrs. Henderson declared, arranging the small wreath of autumn flowers atop Madeline's upswept hair. Your young man won't know what hit him. At the appointed hour, Frederick escorted her to the church, where it seemed half the town had gathered to witness the union. Madeline barely noticed the crowd, however. Her eyes fixed immediately on Isaac, standing tall and handsome at the altar in a new black suit, his face transformed with joy as she appeared in the doorway. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion for Madeline. She was aware of the minister's words, of Isaac's strong, steady voice as he spoke his vows, of the warmth of his hands holding hers. But mostly, she was conscious of the love radiating between them, a tangible force that seemed to envelop them in their own private world even amid the crowded church. I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister finally declared. "Mr. Abernathy, you may kiss your bride." Isaac's kiss was tender yet possessive, a perfect balance that made Madeline's heart soar. The cheers of the congregation barely registered as they turned, hand in hand, to face their future together. The reception at the hotel was a joyous affair, with music and dancing continuing well into the evening. Madeline found herself passed from partner to partner, as the men of Salida claimed their traditional dances with the bride, though her eyes constantly sought out Isaac across the room. As the celebration wound down, Frederick approached them, his expression a mixture of happiness and wistfulness. "It's time I gave you your wedding gift," he said, pressing an envelope into Madeline's hand. "I know you both said you didn't need anything, but this is something I very much want to give." Curious, Madeline opened the envelope, Isaac looking over her shoulder. Inside was a deed to the store. "Uncle Frederick," she gasped. "What is this?" "I'm getting old, my dear," he explained with a gentle smile. "Too old to be running a business day in and day out. I've been thinking of retirement for some time now. The apartment above the store will remain mine, but the business itself, it's yours." "Both of yours," he added, including Isaac with a nod. Isaac looked stunned. "Mr. Zimmerman, this is too generous. We can't possibly—" "You can and you will," Frederick insisted. "Madeline has a good head for business, I've seen that these past months. And you, Isaac, have the respect of everyone in this valley. Together you'll make that store thrive even more than I have." "But what about your plans?" Madeline asked, concerned that her uncle was sacrificing his own needs for their benefit. Frederick's eyes twinkled. "I plan to fish, raid, perhaps travel a bit, and spoil any grandchildren that might come along, of course." The meaningful glance that accompanied this last statement made both Madeline and Isaac blush. "Thank you," Isaac said finally, extending his hand to Frederick. "We'll make you proud. You already have, son." Frederick clasped Isaac's hand firmly before turning to embrace Madeline. "Be happy, my dear. That's all I ask." As the evening drew to a close, Isaac and Madeline slipped away from the remaining guests, boarding the wagon that would take them to their new home. Frederick had insisted they spend their first night as husband and wife in proper privacy, rather than above the store with him and Martha just down the hall. The short journey to their cabin was made in companionable silence, both of them tired from the day's events yet charged with anticipation for what lay ahead. When they arrived, Isaac helped Madeline down from the wagon, but instead of leading her inside immediately, he hesitated. "What is it?" she asked, noting his expression in the moonlight. "There's a tradition," he explained, a smile playing at his lips. "The groom carries his bride across the threshold of their new home." Before Madeline could respond, Isaac had swept her into his arms with effortless strength, carrying her up the short path to the cabin door. Inside, she was greeted by the sight of fresh flowers on the table, a fire laid ready in the hearth, and the soft glow of lamps already lit. "Martha," Isaac explained, setting her gently on her feet. "She rode out earlier to prepare everything." Madeline felt a rush of gratitude for the thoughtful housekeeper who had become a friend over the past months. "It's perfect," she whispered, taking in the cozy space that was now their home. Isaac moved to light the fire, his back to her as he knelt before the hearth. In the growing firelight, Madeline studied her husband, the broad shoulders beneath his wedding suit, the sure movements of his hands as he coaxed the kindling to flame, the dark hair curling slightly at his collar. "My husband," she thought with a sense of wonder. "This good, brave man is my husband." As if sensing her thoughts, Isaac turned, rising to his full height. The look in his eyes as they traveled over her made Madeline's breath catch. "You are so beautiful," he said softly, crossing to where she stood. I still can't quite believe you're mine." "I am," she assured him, reaching up to touch his face. "Completely and forever yours." His kiss was different from those they had shared before, deeper, more urgent, with none of the restraint that propriety had previously demanded. Madeline responded in kind, her arms encircling his neck as she pressed herself against him. "I love you, Madeline Abernathy," Isaac murmured against her lips, the sound of her new name sending a thrill through her. "More than I have words to express." "Show me," she whispered, any nervousness she might have felt about their wedding night dissolving in the certainty of their love. And so he did, with a tenderness and passion that left no doubt of his devotion. In the privacy of their new home, with the fire crackling in the hearth and moonlight streaming through the windows, they consummated their marriage, each discovery a new joy, each touch a promise for the future they would build together. Later, as they lay entwined beneath the quilts Martha had so carefully arranged on their bed, Madeline rested her head on Isaac's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "Happy?" he asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns along her bare shoulder. "Perfectly," she sighed, tilting her face up to his. "And you?" His smile in the dim light was everything she could have hoped for, more than I ever imagined possible. As sleep began to claim them both, Madeline reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. From the terror of captivity to the desperate swim for freedom, from the strong arms that had pulled her from the creek to the loving embrace, she now rested in every step. Even the frightening ones had led her home, and home, as Isaac had said, wasn't a place. It was this, the love between them, the life they would create together, the future stretching bright and promising before them in the beautiful valley they both cherished. 10 years later, the Abernathy home had grown from the original 2-room cabin to a comfortable ranch house overlooking a prosperous small holding. The creek that had once nearly claimed Madeline's life now nourished their gardens and livestock, its gentle babbling a constant melody outside their windows. Zimmerman's Mercantile, now known throughout the region as Abernathy's General Store, had expanded as well, with a second location in the growing town of Buena Vista. Managed by a trusted employee, while Isaac and Madeline oversaw the original Salada store. On a warm June evening, Madeline stood on the front porch, watching as Isaac taught their 8-year-old son, Frederick, to rope a practice post. The boy's face was a study in concentration, his dark hair so like his father's falling across his forehead as he swung the small lariat. Nearby, 6-year-old Margaret chased butterflies through the wildflowers, her laughter carrying on the breeze, while the youngest Abernathy, 2-year-old James, slept soundly in his cradle beside Madeline. "That's it, son," Isaac called encouragingly as Frederick's rope settled around the post. "Now pull it tight, just like I showed you." The boy's whoop of triumph brought a smile to Madeline's face. Frederick was growing more like his father each day, not just in appearance but in his quiet determination and natural kindness. Inside the house, the door to what had once been the original cabin creaked open. Uncle Frederick, now well into his 70s but still spry, emerged with a tray of lemonade. "Thought everyone might be ready for refreshment," he announced, setting the tray on the small table beside Madeline's rocking chair. "It's thirsty work, that roping." "Thank you, Uncle," Madeline said warmly, taking the glass he offered. "You didn't have to do that." Frederick waved away her thanks. What else is a doting great-uncle to do but spoil everyone? He settled into the chair opposite hers, his gaze following Isaac and the children with evident satisfaction. After his retirement, Frederick had continued to live above the store for several years. But when little Frederick was born, he had accepted Isaac and Madeline's invitation to move to the ranch, occupying a comfortable room added specially for him. His presence had been a blessing, particularly during the busy seasons when both Madeline and Isaac were needed at the store. "The Hendersons' letter arrived today," Madeline mentioned, reaching for the envelope tucked in her apron pocket. "They're planning to visit next month, on their way back from San Francisco." Frederick nodded approvingly. "Good folks, those two." "Hard to believe it's been 10 years since that stagecoach robbery." "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Madeline admitted. "Other times it's as if it happened to someone else entirely." "You've built quite a life since then," her uncle observed, his voice thick with pride. "Both of you." Madeline's gaze returned to her family. Isaac, now kneeling beside Margaret, examining a particularly colorful butterfly that had landed on her outstretched finger. Frederick practicing his rope throws with intense focus. Baby James sleeping peacefully beside her. Her heart swelled with a love so profound it sometimes left her breathless. "We have," she agreed softly. "More than I ever dreamed possible." Isaac looked up then, as if sensing her thoughts, his eyes finding hers across the yard. The smile they exchanged held 10 years of shared joys and challenges, of passion undiminished by time, of a partnership that had only grown stronger through each season of their life together. Later that night, with the children asleep and Frederick retired to his room, Madeline and Isaac stood on the porch alone, watching the stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. "You ever think about it?" Isaac asked suddenly, his arm around her waist. "How different things might have been if I hadn't heard those shots that night. If I hadn't been riding near the creek." Madeline leaned into his embrace, considering. "Sometimes. But then I remember what you told me once about Providence." "My father's wisdom, not mine," Isaac reminded her with a smile. "Well, he was right." She turned within the circle of his arms to face him. "I believe we were meant to find each other, Isaac. If not that night, then somehow, somewhere." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch as tender now as it had been on their wedding night. "I believe that too." Madeline rose on tiptoe to kiss him, savoring the familiar warmth of his lips against hers. Even after 10 years and 3 children, Isaac could still make her heart race with a simple touch, a certain look. "I love you, Isaac Abernathy," she whispered against his mouth. "Thank you for saving me." His arms tightened around her. "I love you, Madeline Abernathy. Thank you for giving me a reason to dive into that creek." Together they turned back to the night sky, secure in the knowledge that what had begun as a desperate rescue had blossomed into the greatest love story either could have imagined, a love story that would continue to unfold day by day, year by year, in the beautiful Colorado Valley they called home.